So there's no worst faction in 40k. There's just various degrees of being able to be as evil as you want to be. Take the Jukari. They're literally powered by pain, kind of like Intel Inside, if you remember old computers. They can live forever and regenerate from a single drop of blood or a handful of ash because of the suffering of others. Every Cabalite killed will take 50 of the Too Good Hellraiser movies worth of suffering to respawn, and that suffering has to come from captives that they take on their real space raids. Being taken by them means a lifetime of unending agony, every second drawn out to eternity to squeeze every last drop of anguish from you. That sounds demonically evil, but on a galactic scale these raids are pretty rare. There was a time that the Imperium straight up sold billions of its citizens to the Jukari. But other than that, so long as you keep a gun under your pillow with a single bullet for yourself to use if something prances towards you in high heels, then you're good. There's one faction who are not necessarily the most brutal or sadistic, but who just keep making life worse for everyone. And I do mean everyone. There is nobody, from the Imperium to the Orcs to the traitor Astartes to probably the Jukari, who wouldn't benefit if these toaster-humping cog-botherers would just straighten up and act right. You already know who it is because you clicked on this video or podcast. But here it is anyway. The fucking Adeptus fucking Mechanicus. They're the only playable faction that are themselves a religion. Others, like the Sororitas, are the chamber militant of the ecclesiarchy, but they're not actually a religion themselves. Because they're a religion, the AdMech embody the worst aspects of all religions. And that's not just the dogmatism and fanaticism, because there's plenty of that to go around, but the tendency to schism over what looks to outsiders like relatively minor doctrinal differences, while maintaining the most harmful parts of the core faith. I'm going to start in what's basically the present day and work my way back. In Dan the Man Abnet's Titanicus, a Titan Legion on the Forge world of Areses is in combat with a legion of Chaos Titans. Areses has both an AdMech and Imperial population, though the Imperials are kind of a minority. A further loyalist Titan Legion, Legio Invicta, is sent to reinforce the Legion on the planet. So it's 2 against 1, should be fairly simple, right? When it looks like the combined Imperial forces have the traitors on the back foot, one of the many Mechanicus adepts on the world leaks a document over the planet's noosphere, which is like the internet that every tech adept can connect to wirelessly. The document proves that the Emperor of Mankind is not the Omnisire. So if you ever touched a boob, those words don't mean much to you, but this is why it's significant. 10,000 years prior to events on Areses, the early Imperium on Earth and the Mechanicum, not Mechanicus, on Mars were initially 2 separate entities. Just like the Imperium, there were Mechanicum worlds spread across the galaxy and lost during whatever happened at the end of the Dark Age of technology. However, the Martians were still a major force, and even with the Space Marine legions behind him, it would be pretty unlikely that Big E could take Mars, at least not without also destroying a lot of its technology and industrial capacity, which he needs for his Great Crusade. So, because he's the worst, he decided to play a cunning ruse. The Mechanicum believed in a machine god, or Deus Mechanicum, or Omnisire, and there was no way the Emperor was going to talk them out of that and around to his creed of, like, new atheism. When he arrived on Mars, a good portion of the Mechanicum population just fell to their knees in worship. They couldn't conceive of this giant golden Keanu Reeves looking guy ever existing, so he had to be the incarnation of their Omnisire. He was able to heal an Imperial Knight by just touching it, and could walk on Mars' surface without a helmet. He even made it rain on Mars. And that's all part of the prophecy of the Omnisire's return. So the Parliament of Maguses at Olympus Mons weren't so easily enthralled. He explained to them the technology he had seen during the Dark Age technology. He offered them ships and navigators to head out into the galaxy to re-establish their empire alongside his. Of course, there was always the implication, that he'd let certified crazies like the Blood Angels and Night Lords loose on them. They were more pragmatic and cynical than the adepts who already saw him as the Omnisire. They knew that they couldn't survive a direct confrontation, and that a large part of their population was already converted. So the only way that they could continue as the Mechanicum would be by perpetuating a lie. You'll notice that the Emperor did exactly what the Omnissiah was supposed to do in order to fulfill the prophecy, and that's very much intentional on the Emperor's part, because it was him that wrote the prophecy, millennia before. He totally doomed the Mechanicum. He doomed them so hard that they didn't even know they'd been doomed. And this part gets marginally weirder than usual. So in the 4th to 3rd centuries AD, the person we now know as an emperor was a soldier in the army of the Roman Emperor Diocletian. Somewhere in North Africa, he found a shard of the Void Dragon, one of the Catan, the gods of the Necrons. So watch the previous episode about the Orcs if you want to know a bit more about the Catan, the War in Heaven, and so on. But the gist is, these shards are parts of an incredibly powerful godlike being. The Necron enslaved these shards and used them on the battlefield. They're some of the most powerful models on a tabletop, if you don't count crazy stuff like Warlord Titans. Just going off the tabletop stats, an individual shard is probably a match for Robute Guilliman or the Lion. So there would be several shards combined under North Africa to trouble Big E. However many shards there are, the Void Dragon was powerful, but Big E was just about able to subdue it. He was somehow able to get its ass to Mars, either shortly after he defeated it and maybe teleporting, go through the warp psychically, or maybe he waited thousands of years later and actually took it there in a physical ship. Incidentally, this event in the lore is supposed to have inspired the myth of St. George and the Dragon. And here's where there's something weird I noticed. The Void Dragon affects the occupants of the planet it's buried on. They end up becoming like the Mechanicum. They hate their flesh, the moment I discovered the weakness of my flesh, blah blah blah. And they love technology, kind of what the Void Dragon wanted for the Necrons. It's why the Mechanicum are the way they are. Their entire religion and culture is just a rationalization for the alien influence they're under. Only that didn't happen to the humans on Earth when the Void Dragon was buried under Africa. So something must have happened to make the Void Dragon start psychically affecting the planet it was on. My guess is Big E did something to rig the Void Dragon to make its psychic field. Because he wanted the Mechanicum to happen one day, even if it was thousands of years in the future. You know, our plans are measured in thousands of years? I don't know what she said in that movie. So this is how it's put in a novel Mechanicum. You mean the Emperor orchestrated the evolution of the Mechanicum? Of course, said Semyon. He knew that one day he would need such a mighty organization to serve him, and from the dragon's dreams came the first machines and the priests of Mars. Without the dragon there would have been no Mechanicum, and without the Mechanicum, the Emperor's grand dream of a unified galaxy for humanity would have withered on the vine. Dahlia tried to grasp the unimaginable scale of the Emperor's designs, the clarity of a vision that could set schemes in motion that would not come to fruition for over 20,000 years. It was simply staggering that anyone, even the Emperor, could have so carefully and precisely orchestrated the destiny of so many with such skill and cold ruthlessness. The scale of the deception was beyond measure, and the callousness of it took her breath away. To lie to so many people, to twist the destiny of a planet to suit one man's aims, even a being as lofty as the Emperor, was a crime of such monstrous proportions that Dahlia's mind shied away from that awful calumny. If the truth became known, breathed Dahlia, it would tear the Mechanicum apart. In Titanicus, set 10,000 years later, the truth does become known, and it does tear the Mechanicum, now integrated into the Imperium as the Adeptus Mechanicus, apart. As soon as a tech adept, Edward Snowden's document from deep within the Cult Mechanicus archives across the world, the tech adepts and Jukari soldiers start rioting. For a lot of them, this is proof of what they've always believed about the Imperium, that it's a shackle around them, that they're seen as a junior partner in the coalition, good for greasing engines but not an equal to humanity. The factory hives are in chaos, and the Titan legions are seriously considering laying down their arms while fighting against the Dark Mechanicum, who we'll get to in a moment. That's how deep the resentment is between the AdMech and the Imperium. They just need the smallest excuse before they'll turn on them. The document is eventually declared to be a forgery created by the enemy, and the AdMech accept that. But the whole event shows that they're never more than the Imperium's allies of convenience. That's still very much a thing. Their current fabricator general, the pope of their religion, Raskian, is A, a building, like he's literally a building, and B, smuggled a Jukari homunculus into the Emperor's throne room as a Hail Mary play to repair the Golden Throne, which is failing. This was somewhat irresponsible. Now, while it's true that the throne is breaking down and the Jukari are seemingly the only race willing to be able to fix it, they are also the people who can be trusted least out of literally anyone. The homunculus escaped into the catacombs beneath the palace. He built an army of Frankensteins to storm the throne room. That was probably one of the least bad outcomes, the other being that the homunculus just got close enough to the Emperor and killed him. Ood could have, very briefly, been known as the person, or rather structure, who killed the entire Imperium. But Ood has a pretender to the throne, Belisarius Cawl. Now, Cawl is a great character, very worthy of his own episode. But he's utterly immoral and completely manipulative. While other AdMech have a slightly or completely autistic affect, I'm allowed to say it, Cawl has multiple personalities that he uses as needs dictate, putting them on like masks. And mostly his needs are to lie to people about the terrible things he's done or is about to do. Cawl is over 10,000 years old, and after the Emperor's death worked with Roboute Guilliman on the Primaris project, essentially Space Marines 2.0. When Guilliman returned in the 41st millennium, he hit up his old pal Cawl to complete the project. And that's a very simplified version of why there are multiple boxes of basically useless Marines instead of stabby, shooty, sneaky, big and miscellaneous. But it makes him a good guy, right? It's complicated. So there seem to be chapters of Primaris Marines who are very questionable. The chapter The Scythes of the Emperor were nearly completely wiped out by the Tyranids, until Cawl showed up and basically rebuilt the entire chapter from the ground up with Primaris Marines. That's generally regarded as a good thing. But in the book Genefather by Guy Haley, it appears that several other members of the AdMech have questions about whether the Scythes are loyal to the Imperium or to Cawl. He brushes the accusations away. But that feels like a little lore breadcrumb that was very intentionally placed there. In Dark Imperium, also by Haley, Cawl asks Roboute Guilliman if he can use the G-Seed of the traitor legions to create new Marines. Roboute says no, and again, that's a little gun set on the mantelpiece for later writers to pick up on. There are chapters like the Sons of the Phoenix and the Blood Ravens who definitely seem to have traitor lineage, from the Emperor's children and Thousand Sons respectively. So Cawl isn't just ignoring Guilliman's orders, he's playing around with traitor gene seed, and if Guilliman, the Inquisition, or just other Astartes chapters find out about that, then the consequences are going to be dire. He also dabbles with something very close to the main reason that the AdMech are so harmful: the concept of the sin of innovation. This is the core Mechanicus, Mechanicum, and to some extent Dark Mechanicum doctrine. Any new invention is evil. You cannot create anything new, because everything that mankind, broadly defined, should have is already been given to them by the machine god. We can find ancient technology and to a certain extent remix existing technology, but you can't create anything new. Nearly all Imperial technology comes from the databanks of machines called STCs, or Standard Template Constructs. So thousands of years before even the Horus Heresy, mankind was spreading out to the stars, and to ensure that colonists had access to everything they need, they were sent with what were essentially giant 3D printers. Give an STC machine the raw materials and it'll construct anything from a water purifier to a knight. These STC machines have since been lost, and what we have of them is incomplete. But that sliver of extant STC blueprints provides virtually all of the Imperium's technology. Terminator armor, for example, is actually mining equipment from STCs. In one of the Gaunt's Ghosts books, it's mentioned that a group of explorers who found an STC for a new type of knife were given a planet to rule over. That's how revered ancient technology is, and how the Imperium will willingly hobble itself rather than break the AdMech's cardinal sin. Like, would it really be so terrible to think up a new kind of knife? To the AdMech, yeah, it would be. It would be a direct insult to the Omnisire. And humans throughout the Imperium more or less believe the same thing, because they believe that the Omnisire is the Emperor. Cawl wasn't just responsible for the Primaris Marines, but their weapons and armour. He was behind putting the coolest looking armour on the most useless of all Marines. In Genefather, when questioned by a council of other Archmaguses, he pleads that he wasn't innovating anything. His new weapons are simply remixes of existing technology. The bolt carbide is a bolt gun but smaller, for instance. It kind of makes sense that he's remixing, not innovating, when you consider that if you had 10,000 years to work on it, wouldn't you have made plasma guns that don't explode if you use them too much? So anyway, what's the Dark Mechanicum? We recently saw previews of some Dark Mechanicum models for Horus Heresy, and maybe one day we'll get them for mainline 40k or maybe even Kill Team. Dark Mechanicum, or as they call themselves the New Mechanicum, are in many ways the true successors of the original Mechanicum. So there was a minority on Mars that never accepted that the Emperor was the Omnisire. And 2 centuries after Mechanicum signed the Treaty of Olympus Mons, a tech priest named Kelbor Hal manoeuvred his way to becoming Fabricator General of Mars. He was brilliant but duplicitous, probably not far from most political figures in the Imperium, which means he's exactly the wrong person to be in charge of Mars when Horus's emissary, Regulus, came calling. Horus knew that whoever controlled Mars was going to win the war, so Regulus went in authorised to give Kelbor Hal whatever he could possibly want. If he helped Horus win, the Mechanicum would be equal partners to the Imperium. Imperial forces would withdraw from Forge Worlds, and perhaps best of all, Horus would share the STC tech he found while out crusading. Kelbor Hal wasn't convinced right away, so Regulus made another promise. Horus would free them from all the Emperor's rules on what they could and couldn't research, up to and including abominable intelligence. Anyone good at acronyms? Abominable intelligence? AI. Artificial intelligence. You got it. And this was a clincher. And Kelbor Hal celebrated his new alliance by cracking open the vault where the Emperor had put all his most forbidden artifacts. Just like on Areses, as soon as they had the opportunity to stab the Imperium in the back, a good part of the Mechanicum took it. Not all, but most of Mars and dozens of major Forge Worlds. Now here is where the ludonarrative dissonance comes in. The Dark Mechanicum were and are still free of any restrictions on research and innovation. They can use warp magic, xenotechnology, archaeotech, literally anything. Or they could just sit down in front of some graphing paper and figure out how to build better stuff. Think of the technology that World War II was fought with just 70 years ago versus what Americans can buy in Walmart now. There are billions of these guys all across the galaxy, all genius level at minimum, and with 40 millennia and thousands of species to pull from. And yet, they just kind of don't. Yes, the Dark Mechanicus will create a malignant scrap code virus when the plot needs them to, but they're not going to upgrade the Traitor Astartes bolt guns, or build them new vehicles, or create super weapons that would help Abaddon win the Long War, because then, we wouldn't have a 40k. Games Workshop has given us a faction defined by their constant innovation and willingness to break with the old to create new technology, but they can't actually do any of that in a meaningful way because it would break the entire game. The AdMech was much a plot device as a faction. There needs to be some explanation for why one of the quintillion plus humans in the galaxy, which must include untold millions of Einstein-level geniuses, doesn't just invent a fully automatic las cannon pistol in their garden shed. The explanation is that no ordinary human has the basic scientific knowledge with which to even start thinking about how to improve their technology. And the few people who would be allowed to do the science experiment where you put raisins in a glass of lemonade without being burnt at the stake have such a warped understanding of technology that progress is impossible. The AdMech genuinely don't understand how their technology works, and they don't want to know. It's not that they don't understand atomic theory and the like, it's that they gleefully mix actual science with ritual hokum. They'll put 5 sacred oils onto a piston, and one of them will actually be lubricant while the rest will be perfumes, and there will be no distinction made between them. And if you want a in-game explanation of why the Dark Mechanicum never come up with anything new. It's because they kind of still have this ideal behind them. They're still priests, not scientists. And at the same time, all too often, a tech priest gets on his ancient alien shit, opens up a Necron tomb, and then everyone has to pay for that. That's what happens in Space Marine 2. Despite the first warning of the cult Mechanicus, their dogma, being the alien mechanism is a perversion of the true path, the tech priest in the game has to go and mess around with green glowy stuff. So the Mechanicus hold technology back when the plot needs them to, and they're doing weird science when that'll set up some bolter porn. Look, it's dumb to complain that a story works like a story. That TV trope's way of analysing media just doesn't go anywhere. Games Workshop have a specific tone that they want to hit with 40k. Just like Frank Herbert and later David Lynch and Denis Villeneuve did with Dune. In Dune, the Butlerian Jihad has meant that in the 12th millennia there are no AIs, and the personal shields that most soldiers wear mean that projectile and laser weapons don't work. Herbert wanted warfare in Dune to look medieval, so he wrote for a way for that to happen. The AdMech functions the same way in 40k. They're the in-universe explanation for why technology is static. But if you want to take our morality and impose it on the 40k universe, which is probably a very bad idea, then the AdMech and their dogma are responsible for untold suffering, perhaps more than any other faction. Because of them, the Imperium can't create an antifungal agent that stops orcs from reproducing. It can't develop a psychic weapon to disrupt the Tyranid hive mind. It can't develop its own version of the Blackstone pylons that would keep chaos in track. Trillions of people toil in factories that could be automated, or die from exposure to pesticides in agri-world that could have genetically modified crops. Now, I'm not a believer that tech can solve every problem, quite the opposite. But it can make quite a few of them, like food, warmth, clean water, into basically non-issues for a lot of people. And the AdMech prevents that, and it does so because of a lie. The introductory text to the Warhammer 40k books has changed a little over the years, but one part has remained consistent, and it directly addresses the problem that the AdMech have caused. Forget the power of technology and science, for so much has been forgotten, never to be relearned. Forget the promise of progress and understanding, for in the grim dark future there is only smashing that subscribe button, turning on down notifications.